ブレンダ、彼女はどうしているであろうか。
ちょっと試し切りしたいもんだね。女も戦う気概を持たなきゃね。女だからって甘く見ないでほしいね。はっどうだい、あたいの実力は。さあ行くよ。あんたじゃ受けきれないよ。女ばかりの傭兵だ。いつでも出られるよ。後でどっか飲みに行かないかい？あんたとあたいだけ。
Hey everyone, this is Nitro. So, after the video that I've done on Akaya, I thought I would cover the other hero on that upcoming banner, Brenda. So, before I begin, I should mention that in the last video, I originally said that the banner was being released on Thursday, April 2nd. It's not. It's released on Thursday, April 9th. So that was just a very silly mistake I made. My apologies there. Even my own tentative banner guides say that this banner is coming on April the 9th. So I'm not quite sure how I came up with the April 2nd number. I think I was just eager for the banner to come up, so that's why I just incorrectly stated the wrong date. In any case though, I'm going to be talking about why Brenda may actually be the superior hero of this new banner, interestingly enough. So, here we go. Brenda will be useful in both PvP and PvE, potentially. Okay? And in terms of the factions she's part of Yelas Legends and Meteor factions. Okay? On Wiki there is far less information on Brenda than there is on Akaya, so I don't really know who unlocks her bonds or what her 4th, 7th, and 10th heart bond effects are, for example. Well, we all know what the 10th heart bond is, it's 5% to all stats, but the 4th and 7th one are unknown. Nonetheless, Brenda may actually be the superior hero of this banner because she's actually a very solid attacker, and she'll be an attacker that's useful in both PvP and PvE, and I'll go into why. Now, in order to use Brenda, you will have to use her at 6 stars. Okay? And that is probably the biggest limitation on building up a Brenda in the first place, because it's going to be hard to have the opportunity to grind her up to 6 stars. Okay? So that is that hard limitation. It's not because she's a terrible hero, but rather the upcoming heroes are all generally considered to be supremely overpowered. And at this time, everyone is probably likely to be grinding both Yusuke and Hiei or any of the Yu Yu Hakusho heroes. So, as a result, I feel like Brenda gets passed over because nobody can afford to grind her up. But she does have a use. Okay? So, the use in PvE content is reliant on her talent, where after dealing or receiving damage and entering combat, let's say 4 times, I'm going to talk about her purely at 6 stars because that's the level she should be at to be used. Okay, she gets to take an additional turn. So she basically has a self-act again effect, right? Which is huge. To be fair, it also activates at 5 turns at 4 or 5 stars, so it's either 5 turns or 4 turns. Okay, but the other part of her talent is what requires you to build her up as high star as possible. And the effect is that when she's battling against foes with hit points equal or lower than her, the damage increases by 10, 15, 20, or 30%. So this kind of damage increase effect affects her soldiers as well as herself. And it's the same effect that Lana, Rachel, Elwyn, and Yulia have. So we all know that all of those other characters are very capable of one-shotting enemies, so Brenda falls into that category as well. A very powerful attacker that can one-shot enemies. And in her case, she also gets an extra act again effect every so often, which is always useful. In terms of classes and soldiers, we see here that she has access to a Royal Knight class, or the God of War class, which is Lancer. Okay. So that right there is actually what determines her utility in both PvE and PvP. In PvE, you'll probably want her as the Royal Knight because you'll want a cavalry attacker that can attack with high mobility, right? But in PvE content, you're going to want her as a Lancer class. And in fact, as a Lancer class, she will be just like Elwyn. In other words, a Landius buster. She should have the ability to one-shot Landius very easily and crush him. And in addition to that, her skills are what makes her so amazing at taking out Landius. Just like Elwyn, she has Frontal Assault, where it attacks a single enemy dealing 1.7 times damage. Before combat, you add 20% of your attack to your defense, and finally you get to disable the target's passive skills, which lasts 2 turns and can't be dispelled. Right? The key point here is to disable the target's passive skills. It prevents Landius from reviving. So as long as your Brenda is fully built with 30% damage increase, she should be able to one-shot Landius with Frontal Assault, taking him out and removing, and because of the disabled passives, Landius won't be able to revive. Elwyn can do that very, very easily, and now so can Brenda. In addition to Frontal Assault though, what the advantage that Brenda has over Elwyn is that Brenda actually gets a mobility skill. From the Royal Knight class, she gets access to Strike, which allows her to move another 3 blocks and attack the enemy. In other words, she, unlike Elwyn, which often struggles to get into range to attack Landius, Brenda will have absolutely no problems doing that, as you'll see in this short clip. So there we saw Brenda rapidly use Strike, Frontal Assault, and then one-shot Landius, giving his user's team a massive advantage in PvP. So that would be her main utility in PvP content. Other than that though, in PvE she still has a lot of useful potential skills. For example, she has the Obsidian Assault, which is, I believe this is her other ultimate skill. We don't know what the cooldown is, but it should be 5 turns, and the effect of that is you attack a single enemy, dealing 1.1 times damage, and it also pushes the target back 2 squares. In addition to that, for each block move before attacking, you can do damage dealt increase of 20%, up to a 60% damage dealt increase. And finally, before combat, the enemy gains Curse of Wounding, where they received healing effects are converted 20% damage. This effect lasts 1 turn and the effect cannot be dispelled. So, a heal reversal skill, a skill that deals massive amounts of damage, right? 1.1 times with another 60% increase, and it's a knockback skill that can break the enemy formation potentially. Lots of effects. The main weakness of this skill would be the fact that the Curse of Wounding only lasts 1 turn. So the only way you can really use it effectively is after the enemy has moved their tank. Then you use it. However, it's just so versatile, If the enemy has Tiaras as their healer, all of that, like the healing, gets converted into additional damage. Similarly, Juggler's heals, his self-heals, gets turned into damage too, right? So, a great skill overall. Now, I have to say, I'm not 100% sure if Curse of Wounding is the Listel version or the Sakura version, because they are 2 very different things. But nonetheless, it seems like it has a lot of utility. It allows Brenda to actually be useful even against Juggler, as opposed to only being a tank buster against Landius. And finally, if you were to use Brenda for PvE content, presumably in the Royal Knight class, she has access to lower cooldown skills that can be used fairly consistently, right? She has Onrush, which is 1.5 times damage with 2-turn cooldown, and she also has Armor Pierce, 2-turn cooldown, doing 1.5 times damage, and if the enemy does manage to survive, you can inflict minus 30% defense on them for 2 turns after the battle. Last but not least, Brenda has Move Again, so that each individual attack does another additional 10% damage, and after battle, she can move again using any leftover movement. So lots and lots of useful skills. So in terms of building her, I would generally say move again is a must bring. I would say strike is probably pretty much a must bring as well. And then as a result, you only get to bring one attack skill, which would most likely be frontal assault, right? Of course, you can swap that out for obsidian assault if you were facing, let's say, juggler and you want to use that instead. And then finally, for PvE content, you may very likely give up the strike in favor of bringing armor pierce, move again, as well as onrush, potentially. Yeah, it does depend. So, with all of that covered, let's now talk about her soldiers and then finally the gear that Brenda would use. Okay. So, we're going to start with the soldiers, and in terms of soldiers that she has access to, they're listed right here. She has Guardian Cavalry, Gargoyle, Phalanx, Berserker, Dragoon, Amazon Champion, and Highland Warrior. Lots of soldier choices. The unfortunate thing is most of these soldiers are not very common. Right? Very few people would have most of these soldiers built. So that's another annoyance factor of using Brenda, right? That you have to build up soldiers for her. Realistically, the most likely soldiers you have built up would be Gargoyles and Phalanx soldiers, right? Gargoyles because some people built them up for Ulti Muller and for Listel and so on. As for Phalanx, it's because you're likely to have them for your tank. Another soldier, the third soldier that you may have built up would be Highland Warrior if you use them on Leonhard, right? So there are 3 possible soldiers that you may have built up, but as I mentioned, they are fairly uncommon soldiers. The biggest annoyance though is I feel like her best soldiers are the ones that are least likely to be built up, right? What specifically? It would probably be Berserker and the Amazon Champions. Okay. In the case of Berserker, it's because as a Lancer class character fighting against a cavalry character, the cavalry generals tend to charge ahead of their soldiers, so that it allows your Lancer general to do all their hits on the enemy cavalry hero. As a result, you don't actually need to kill off the enemy soldiers. And so Brenda could run infantry soldiers and still kill off Landius that way. So in that sense, you want the soldier who has the highest ability to do damage. And that's what Berserkers offer. Yeah. The other great soldier, of course, is Amazon Champions, because Amazon Champions also have increased attack when they're fighting enemies. If I just quickly bring it up right here, right on the Wikigrisser page, Amazon Champions. Their effect at level 10 is attack is increased by 30% when attacking, and they also get a 75% probability to reduce enemies' attack and defense by 20% for 1 round. Right? So, yes, it's compared to, let's say, the Berserker, who I believe has a 45% damage increase. Oh, I was actually wrong. Berserkers also only have 30%. Oh wait, they actually have less. They only have a 30% crit chance increase and a 15% attack. Ah, I mixed up the Orc Berserker with the Berserker. That's why. Okay, so that was my mistake there. Nonetheless, so actually, let me take that back. The Berserker actually is not a great soldier choice for him, right? It's a 15% attack increase, which in fact, the Highland Warriors have the same amount. 15% attack increase. So Berserkers, probably not a good choice. Instead, you would want the... Okay. So, let me just rephrase all this then. If you want to use an infantry soldier, Highland Warriors will be fine. And you should have Highland Warriors built, assuming you've used Leonhard. If you want a Lancer soldier, because Brenda is an offensive character, you're going to want Amazon Champions rather than Phalanx. Although Phalanx can be used for PvE content without any issue. Okay. But for PvP, you're definitely going to want the Amazon Champs. And then, of course, the Flyer Soldier, which is the Gargoyles, are a versatile soldier that can kind of do both, right? As long as the Gargoyles have higher than 50% hit points, their attack is increased by 30%. And if hit points is less than 50%, defense is increased. So they're another soldier with 30% increased stats. And Gargoyles are likely to be built if you use Ulte Muller and so on. So that's the other viable soldier choice. As for Guardian Cavalry and Dragoons are usable, but generally speaking, I find cavalry soldiers are the least wanted ones, right? Because there's just so many Lancers. Lancers totally hard countered cavalry soldiers. So while Dragoons can increase attack and defense by 30% when attacking, you don't need them when you have Gargoyles built. I would say Gargoyles is the much better option than choosing to bring Dragoons or choosing to level them up in the first place. As for Guardian Cavalry, when attacking, all damage is reduced by 45%. Why would you even want that? The game is about doing damage, not about preventing damage dealt to you. So there you go. Ignore those two. So overall, it would be Phalanx, Gargoyle, Amazon Champions, Highland Warrior. Right. And now, at this point, we move on to talk about the equipment for Brenda. So, Brenda, equipment-wise, would be either bringing either cavalry gear or Lancer gear, right? Realistically, Lancer gear would be the identical to Elwyn, and cavalry gear would be pretty much exactly what I covered in the Akaya video. So let me just bring that up for you, and that will pretty much give you the idea of what Brenda should use. So here we are. So, Brenda would be pretty much just like any other cavalry character, Once again, while I said best gear, secondary gear, and other gear, there is some, I guess, you can kind of mix and match depending on what you prefer personally, right? For example, the choice between Aeolus's battle armor and bloodline magic armor is very, very much up to you. Do you want to reduce damage you take from physical attacks, or do you want to decrease damage you take from ranged attacks? I generally say ranged attacks via Aeolus because your melee characters generally shouldn't have any problems tanking a physical hit. They tend to have very high defense, but they tend to have low magic defense, which needs the Aeolus to survive. So that's generally why I put Aeolus as the best option. Hand of Tear, of course, increases the damage for when you attack, so that's always the best option. And then the accessory, I said Overlord's Badge because of all the debuff immunities that it offers, but really you can use Slayer's Emblem very, very effectively. You can use any accessory there that provides plus attack at the end of the day. Other than that, I personally say that the best weapon is Seal Guardian, but you may consider Frost Rend with the chance of applying a mobility debuff on the enemy to be superior. That is very viable as an option. I think Frost Rend because Brenda should be the one that's crushing the enemy tanks, so why do you even need to apply a mobility debuff in the first place, right? But once again, if you can't crush the enemy tank in one hit, for example, let's say you're facing Juggler and you can't kill him in one hit, being able to mobility debuff Juggler and force the enemy to dispel it can be a game-winning move in PvP. So that's why Frost Rend may very likely be a better option than Seal Guardian for PvP. Luck-based, but when it kicks in, it may win you a match, because the enemy has to act with their healer right away, preventing it from healing later on. And then of course, in the other gear section, that's usually where I place the most common gear that people are likely to have. You can see I have a Last Knight here because everyone should have a Last Knight built as one of their first SSRs. Aeneas's helmet and armor were both given to you as well, just like the Last Knight early on. and then Wing Shin Guard was also given to you. So this is very common gear that she can use, right? The secondary and best gear is very much a pick and choose, up to you kind of scenario. Okay. So that would be for cavalry class heroes. Right? Lancer class, of course, can't use swords or they can use lances, but they can also use axes. So it completely changes things up. Brenda in her Lancer class should really be running what you see here. Okay. The first set is pretty much the ideal set for Elwyn as well. Okay. Ragnarok, because Brenda's talent requires you to have higher hit points than the enemy. In addition, doing fixed damage to the enemy beforehand is always a nice bonus, makes it even easier to one-shot the enemy target, right? Even if you don't have a Ragnarok though, of course, you'd be at the same hit points as the enemy, so you would still do the 30% increased damage. But Ragnarok still, nonetheless, is by far the best in slot here. Aeolus is that battle armor for the same reason as the Lancer class, right? Hand Up Tier for the same reason it's a Lancer class. And then the Apex boots, because mobility is king, okay? My Elwyn, I currently don't have a single pair of Apex boots, and my Elwyn really struggles with mobility issues in PvP. More than anything else, that's probably what loses me PvP matches when I do use Elwyn. Well, getting the mobility boots, the Apex boots for +1 mobility increases your Lancer mobility to 4. You know, yes, it's not 5 like the cavalry class, but 4 is solid, and it really helps. Right? Other than that, pretty much the exact same gear options as the cavalry class, right? And for the weapon, you know, I put Peacemaker because axes generally just have more damage. In addition, it has the effect of being potentially able to apply a disable passives on the enemy, which is always nice. Yeah. At the very least, for PvP content, it's a nicer effect than last night. But of course, since Lancers can use spears and lances, she can use a last knight, you know. So while I list these as options, you can very much use other gear if you don't have these at the end of the day. You know? So with all this mentioned, you know, the last thing about Apex boots that really helps for Brenda is that keep in mind she usually brings move again. So that extra additional movement always has utility. Right? If you need to move a short distance to attack the enemy, you always have the ability to use that extra tile to retreat further back. So, and then finally, for both sets of gear, I would say Breeze is the best enchant in both cases, right? Breeze gives a 10% damage increase, you know, which already more or less matches up with full moons plus 10% attack and so on. So, in addition though, it has that chance of giving you the additional +2 mobility. And that 2 additional mobility can always be helpful. Yeah. At the very least, you can never go wrong with having additional mobility, especially on a character who has move again. Okay. And that's why Breeze, without doubt, is her best enchant. Absolutely. Okay. And that is everything I wanted to say about Brenda. So at this point, I'm going to have an example Apex Arena clip from the Chinese server. Now, I'll say right now that this specific clip is not a normal situation for Brenda. Yeah. Realistically, Brenda should be killed early on in combat, right? But in this particular video, the enemy did not have any magic attackers, right? So as a result of that, after Brenda used her frontal assault skill, she had extremely high defense, which made her almost unkillable by the opponent. And as a result, she was able to run around at will on the battlefield and just keep attacking and supporting the player's party. So I hope you found this video useful and that you enjoy seeing the following clip of Brenda in action. Thanks for watching, everyone. And on that note, Nitro out.
What are you willing to lose? You cover your